I hope that all Republicans will put minor differences aside and help elect a Republican House and Senate so that we may all benefit from a proper check and balance that leaves our nation more secure, more prosperous, and freer.
Well, Eric Cantor is out. New face soon to be in. Republicans need to spend a lot of time and effort from the House Majority Leader on down to prepare for the midterms and beyond. I like the shaking and baking in the personnel ranks. It's good discourse. Welcome in. We'll talk about this and a whole lot more. The senior editor for Newsmax magazine, David Patten, joins us today. Always a pleasure to see you, David. We're going to talk about Eric Cantor, but we have to walk everything now to what we've heard in the last hour or so.
Absolutely.
The president coming out and basically saying, I think he said exactly what he could say at this point. I don't think there was anything else that he really could do. We'll put in advisors. We'll send people in. We knew this was going to happen. I think the interesting thing, though, is that he basically said a couple of times, Iraq, it's up to you. If you don't get it done, we can't help.
Right. Of course, the essence of Iraq's situation right now is that Nouri al-Maliki and the Shias essentially launched basically a sectarian war against the Sunnis, which was the precise problem that the surge had overcome. You'll remember that Anbar awakening in 2007 because U.S. troops moved in, we sort of were a buffer zone, we calmed down the Sunnis, and then they actually turned against al-Qaeda. Ironically, the al-Qaeda group that now has come back in a slightly different form, the ISIS group. So it's understandable, I think, that the president and Americans generally are very hesitant to jump back into what, after all, looks like it's the beginnings of a religious civil war there in Iraq.
And as you put it so simply, it boils down to, you made the mess. We helped you. You made it all over again. So why do we have to come in and help you again to do it? Which I think it's a fair thing to say. We can't keep coming in and rescuing you if you keep screwing it up.
I agree. It is fair to say. There are some real strong hawks, foreign policy hawks on the Republican side who still think that we should go in, still think there should be a military presence there. So you can sort of debate that either way. I think one thing there's a couple of points from what he said today, the president said today, that are important.
Please.
One is that they are going to have military advisors there to help the Maliki troops, if you will. What that should do is at least strengthen them to the point where they can hold their current territory. And that's necessary unless you want to see ISIS take over the whole country, and nobody wants that. The other thing that was really interesting is he said that the United States will not undertake military operations. Now, how do you define that? We're going to have trainers there. Are we going to do these drone strikes everybody's been talking about? You could legitimately say as president, we're not going to do military operations, and then you could start drone strikes. It wouldn't necessarily be a contradiction in terms, actually, because those drone strikes primarily have been done by the CIA and therefore are really a covert op when they've happened in Pakistan. So really that question of will there be drone strikes, it's still on the table.
I think your point's well taken, too, because when you mention drone strikes, there is a difference now in the military theater between drone strikes and actual air strikes. If you're going to send in the military, you're going to send in jets, you're going to take certain strikes, that is a much more concerted effort, a much more combined effort. Drone strikes are individual. You can go after certain places, certain people, certain things. You have a lot of the intelligence on the ground, it would seem right now, for drone strikes, but it is that mass airstrike that you simply have got to get prepared for. And I don't know any military leader who would want to go into any sort of a conflict without two things. One, knowing what the theater is, but then there comes up, if you're going to do airstrikes, don't you have to follow with ground troops? I mean, here we go again. It's a slippery slope.
You're absolutely right that when you start getting into the subject of airstrikes as opposed to drone strikes, it's really a totally different ball game.
Very.
One of the reasons for that is that when you're doing airstrikes, you have to actually have targeting. You know, you can't just drop the bomb. Even though these are very precise weapons, you need to have laser pointers, laser targeted. That works best when you have people on the ground. The Obama administration military strategists know that. They do not want to put American boots on the ground in a combat role, and that's why I don't think you're going to see those airstrikes unless it's just absolutely a desperation move. But right now it looks like the initial thrust of ISIS has been stalled, and now there's fighting going on. So unless there's a real setback for Maliki, then the likelihood is you won't see U.S. airstrikes.
And we talk about Maliki. I think what he said is very true. Basically said, whether it's Maliki or someone else, his exact words were, as long as deep divisions continue and worsen, it will be difficult to lead. But he did not put his full support behind Nouri al-Maliki and basically said whoever's running the country will help. And that to me says what a lot of people have talked about. White House has no faith in al-Maliki to lead at this point, and if he doesn't, they feel that they pretty much will have to stop in their tracks.
And not only are they saying that they'll work with whoever, implying that it might not be Maliki, but administration spokesmen off the record have made it very clear to the Washington Press Corps they want Maliki out. And it's understandable why, because the Saudis and also the United Arab Emirates are basically saying, look, our condition for working with you, the United States, to try to make sure that Iraq doesn't fall to these rebels is that you've got to get Maliki out of there, just because, again, of the religious, persecution that he's brought to his role.
It would seem at this point that perhaps the president and his advisors are going to bank on not putting their full support behind Maliki and having those inside the government then do the job for them and say, Mr. Prime Minister, it's time for you to leave. And we know in that area of the country it doesn't necessarily happen cleanly, but it would seem as if he's almost asking them or advising them to do a little dirty work for us.
I think the administration would love nothing better than to see Maliki go, under whatever circumstances. The problem is, who's behind Maliki? Iran. Iran, very powerful with the Shias, very powerful in Iraq, basically a country that has the potential at least to dominate Iraq. And some concerns are that they might actually turn Iraq into a version of what Lebanon is, bring in Hezbollah, bring in these sort of quasi-governmental troops that really would be running everything behind the scenes. So it could, that could be a nightmare situation. One thing we know for sure, you don't want ISIS to run rampant, because if they continue to thrive, and they've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars and all kinds of American military equipment that they've seized, that could become a launching pad for attacks in the United States. So very serious situation.
All right, now the United States hopes that Nuri al-Maliki is out. Let's talk about one man who is out. We've all talked about Eric Cantor here for several days now.
Sure.
They're going to have a vote today. It has been postponed a little bit. We're waiting to hear for the new House Majority Leader. It still comes down to the question, with Cantor out, how does this change any of the leadership dynamic then, if at all? Because it doesn't seem as if Raul Labrador really has much of a chance at this point. He'd like to say that he could, but is there going to be much? Will the American people and the Republicans notice much?
I don't think that the American people are going to notice a whole lot. Keep in mind that this is a leadership position that will basically last from now through January when the new Congress comes in. So these elections today, while important and they could set the tone, aren't going to have sort of a lasting impact that Americans are going to notice when we start having policy come down by the new Congress. It could be very important symbolically. It could also conceivably have an impact in the fall election, depending on how the GOP base views these elections. So if Kevin McCarthy wins, as is expected, for the majority leader job, really he's every bit the conservative moderate, if you will, that Cantor is, and he's a good friend of Speaker Boehner, so you really wouldn't look for a change in tenor there. Although he is very well connected, and he's got a lot of numbers and names in his Rolodex.
He's got a lot of numbers and names. Cantor had money in his pocket. He had Wall Street behind him now. With him gone, will there be any lack of dollars, or is there a thinking process that Cantor may still help behind the scenes because he knows that in the end, one way or another, it will benefit him to at least stay in the process?
Sure. I believe he will stay in the process. I believe that he's got some leftover campaign money. He'll go out fundraising, probably start a PAC, and he'll probably have a big impact on the midterms. So, yeah, I think he'll continue. Don't forget, though, that McCarthy from California has really wooed and courted the high-tech community. So you might lose some money on the Wall Street side, but you might get some Google, some Facebook, some Microsoft, some high-tech money. There's a lot of it out there.
There's always money around, David. About a minute or so that we have left here. We have talked about Chuck Todd from NBC News, who made his statement, which, of course, as a newsman, you always want to hold back sometimes on making these statements, but he made it. Right. He was talking about the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll and said, I mean, essentially, the public is saying your, meaning Barack Obama, presidency is over. He's got a point with the American people, but maybe he didn't mean to say it as harsh as that.
Yeah, I think he's walked it back a little bit. I don't think that he intended to pronounce the end of the Obama presidency. I don't think that's what he meant to do. But his larger point there, Ed, was if you look at those NBC Wall Street Journal poll results, absolutely devastating for the president. 41% approval, as low as he's ever been. If you look at his ability to conduct foreign policy, he's upside down by something in the neighborhood of 57-33. I mean, all confidence that this president knows what he's doing overseas now appears to be gone. And in other categories, he's hurting as well. So if he's not a lame duck, let's just say the clock's ticking and there isn't a whole lot of time left on it.
I'm hearing the quacking in the hallways. David Patten, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for coming by. We, of course, want to know what you think about this, but we also want to remind you that be a little pointed in your comments here, because now as you start to talk about what the president has said and where the Republicans are going, make sure you tell us exactly what's behind it. You can do that on Twitter, email, and Facebook. Coming up next, the president has made his statement about what the American government will do in Iraq. We will respond to that with someone who knows what it's like on the ground and strategically speaking. This is MidPoint, where every day we question everything.